I watched Fighting With My Family the other day. You may not have heard of it, but it's a biopic about a British wrestler called Paige and how she got a break in the WWE. It's a solid, fun, feel-good comedy. Not like a high art film, and not the sort of film I typically pick to talk about here on my channel, except for one thing. It shows working class Britain on the big screen. I mean, do you know how rare that is? Because of the way films present Britain, I'm sure most of America thinks here in Britain we live in a land of either Harry Potter or Hugh Grant, which means we're all either really posh or witches and wizards. It's very rare to see because Britain is a very windy, grey place where everybody's go-to conversation is to moan about the weather, and everything's a bit understated in our culture as well. You know, unlike the flashy, epileptic madness of Hollywood, and I suppose America in general to some extent, where things come in massive sizes and there's cheerleaders and halftime shows and people in audiences whoop rather than an understated yet civilised clapping like we do. Britain isn't a place that's made for the big screen in that sense. That's my point. You know, we don't have wide, sunny spaces like in America, nor gigantic houses with porches or massive Walmarts. You know, living in a tiny cottage here in a tiny village with tiny shops would be considered a very good home. As such, Britain, outside of some nice apartments in London or some made-up wizard schools, is very rarely seen in cinema. It's not considered flashy or cinematic enough. You know, unless it's a very serious, hard-hitting drama about poverty and the working class struggles, like Billy Elliot or Trainspotting. You know, that's the point of those films, so that's different. But Fighting With My Family was really refreshing in this sense because it's not a very serious drama about working class struggles. It's not hard-hitting. It's a feel-good comedy that happens to weave all of that working class stuff into the background, both the good and the bad. You know, the dad moaning that he has to put on a top because his son's girlfriend's posh parents are coming over.
Unbelievable. Who is her dad? The Archbishop of shitting Kent?
Alongside mention of drug abuse and suicide. Funny insults and talking shit about people alongside the worry of a dad that might have to go back to bank robbing if the income doesn't pick up. It's nice to see ordinary working class families in a way that's endearing rather than a hard-hitting sob story, I suppose. And from a personal point of view, it's set in Norwich, which is a place I know. You know, even other British people don't know much about East Anglia, or Norfolk and Suffolk at least. They're forgettable, largely unknown counties. Norwich is the only place with a little bit of fame here because of Alan Partridge and the football club, but even that's minimal. So to see it appear in a big budget film, a film that can attract talents like Nick Frost and Lena Headey and The Rock, to be partly set in Norwich, a place to film even jokes is without electricity and running water. I mean, that's big stuff. The characters don't have Norfolk accents, admittedly. That's kind of annoying to me. You know, they all sound like they're from the West Country for some reason. Nobody ever does Suffolk or Norfolk accents on film. It's completely unheard of for some reason. We're just forgettable counties, apparently. The closest thing we've got is John Fort in Goodnight Mr. Tom. And this is a minor thing to make a video about, but it is interesting when you think on it. Why does cinema insist on showing the sunniest, brightest, wonderful locations all the time? I mean, excluding serious drama, obviously, with hard-hitting films, you know, those films are meant to look dark and grimy, but anything light-hearted or feel-good, or even just ordinary, something that's not dark and gritty, why are those films always set in wonderfully picturesque places, as though anyone who lives in grey, working-class areas only experience dark and gritty life? You know, like feel-good stories are completely alien to them. And The In-Betweeners is another good example at this point. A sitcom about ordinary kids in ordinary grey Britain, and then it goes and gets a film for the big screen, so they set that in Mallorca, and then the second one in Australia. Britain itself is not cinematic enough. So in that sense, Fighting With My Family is really refreshing. A film that showcases ordinary working class Britain in a way that's life-affirming. A way that celebrates the love you can find in these communities. A way that shows you the bleak reality whilst keeping it normal and everyday instead of turning it into some violin sob story. I love that about this film. You know, you see a gran fishing for drugs out of a bin. You see kids messing about trying to smash a lamppost with a hammer tied to a load of sticks because they've got nothing better to do. It's bleak, but in a sort of endearing way at the same time. So that on its own made this a good movie for me. But it also kind of pokes fun at the way cinema glosses over ordinary working class life, because Paige is from this mundane, typical England that's contrasted massively by the bright, glamorous world she's alienated by when she comes to America. The world that pressures her into dyeing her hair blonde and getting a fake tan, the world that's fake and exaggerated. The world where wrestling feels like a circus arena and all the lights and dramatic ring entrances are meant to play up reality as something bigger than it actually is. The contrast between the two is great. Real life, and then the whitewashed, glamorised version of it films often present. Because again, how often do you see the real America in cinema outside of the gritty, serious dramas? More often, admittedly. I mean, off the top of my head, Coach Carter is a similar example of a sports film that shows real working class life without making a huge, dark, hard-hitting point about it. So it does happen, but it's still rare compared to the idyllic, American dream sort of cinema world we normally get. Which is a shame. We need to see more of the bleak sides of life. And sometimes that will mean a serious, hard-hitting drama, which is good. I don't want to sound like I'm criticising them, I'm just saying it doesn't always have to be. You can have feel-good films in bleaker settings. Those films remind us that there is love and beauty to be found in the mundane, everyday world, that just because we don't have the sort of life we're sold in adverts, and because life can be a struggle and not everything is sunny, that it can still be okay. It also helps us to confront reality as well. Sometimes hard-hitting films are too hard-hitting for you to want to watch. You know, sometimes you switch off for that. Sometimes simpler films like this can do the trick. You know, sometimes you get governments who like to gloss over the sort of struggles ordinary families go through. And what's been happening in America at the moment. For too long, their struggles have been glossed over and ignored. America's been held up as this dreamy lie of its flashy lights and American dream, all the while sweeping the truth under the carpet until now the people won't accept it anymore. They demand to be heard, they need to be. Fighting with My Family is just a fun, simple biopic, but the reality it dares to depict is important. And it just feels real, and that's refreshing. For that, I loved it.